What the fuck do you need rope for? Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
I'm Eliot.
Before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you would like to help us out with supporting the show, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are going into the Wayback Machine in order to talk about an old module that we just completed in our Monday first edition or early D&D game. We're going to be doing a post-mortem of our playthrough of the Fichelrak's Tomb. It is Fichelrak's Tomb. It's not the Tomb of Fichelrak. Is that correct?
It is Fichelrak's Tomb.
Yeah, because the order of words in titles are something I get wrong all of the time, especially for these old modules. And I don't see any rhyme or reason to whether it was like the Tomb of Horrors or Fichelrak's Tomb, or where the nouns and where the adjectives in a particular title go.
Yep, no articles here. Super simple.
So, Jordan, since you were the DM and you ran us through it, you have a lot more information about the module itself, not just from your GM's level understanding of it, as you had all of the information, and we just kind of literally stumbled our way through parts of it. Can you give us a little bit of background about the tomb? Because as we've been doing this, I've been trying as hard as I can to avoid any information about these older modules. I'm trying to go into these with completely fresh eyes, not really knowing what to expect. Some of these are so famous by now that legends have arisen from them, but this is one that I had never heard of before we started playing it.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it either. I've been playing D&D since I was 12 years old, and that was a long, long time ago. So Fichelrak's Tomb, arguably, it's probably the third printed D&D adventure. There's the early history of original Dungeons and Dragons, like in the mid-70s. It's not super well documented. It's all very low budget stuff. A lot of people are just flying by the seat of their pants. Generally, the closest thing I can see that is a complete dungeon that saw print outside of TSR was Dungeon of the Ground Goblins. That was in 1976. Also in 1976, that was May, by the way. In June of 76, you see Palace of the Vampire Queen, which is probably the first thing that we would think of as a module. Dungeon of the Ground Goblins is just a tiny little snippet of a dungeon map and a key. It doesn't have anything else, but Palace of the Vampire Queen has multiple levels, has a storyline, though sparse, and it was sold as a booklet. Then comes Fichelrak's Tomb, which is also June of 76, and is... So, I think it's probably the most sophisticated by far of these other things, for a couple reasons we'll get into about the way the dungeon's constructed. But it was published in a fanzine called The Dungeoneer that was edited by Janelle Jaquays in college, along with some friends. Now, all the details on how this worked out, I'm a little hazy on. I've read multiple articles, and it's, not well documented, like I said. But so far as I'm aware, it got famous because the Judges Guild, which was the third-party company that was really filling the gap that TSR left by not making their own modules for several years in the mid-70s. Judges Guild bought the Dungeoneer, including Fichelrak's Tomb and several of the other dungeons that went along with it. This was published in something called the Adventuresome Compendium, that is the first 6 issues of the Dungeoneer, and it's wild. It's very much like the early Strategic Review issues of the magazine that later became Dragon, but it's fascinating to read because it's a bunch of people just first getting the idea of what this role-playing thing can be, and they are just brainstorming like motherfuckers. Like, some of this shit is just ridiculous. And I mean, not all of it's good. A lot of it's not good. Some of it's just like really zany, like just seeing what they can get away with. But some of it's really sick. And, it's clear that these people were well read, that they were paying attention to, that this like sword and sorcery tradition. There's like callbacks to different things that people are into. A lot of like Lovecraft kind of stuff sneaks in. But yeah, it's a really interesting piece of D&D history, and so I'm happy you guys gave me the opportunity to run it for you.
I did enjoy most of it. Like all dungeons, eventually I kind of got tired of being in a dungeon. That's going to happen every single time we do a dungeon, though, so don't take that as a criticism of anything to do with the way you're running.
My participation in this, I think that I would have had a different view if I didn't have so much absenteeism and I didn't switch characters in the middle of it. I mean, but that's going to happen too. I mean, the thing about a dungeon, especially a long run dungeon, is that, dying in the dungeon in the midst of it and then having to be shoehorned in with a new character, it's not the ideal place to create a new connection to the party. So, it took me a few sessions of my new character. I think I've had him for 3 sessions. And it wasn't really till this 3rd session that I was like, why is this guy with them still? Like, why? And it kind of made me have a hard time getting engaged with the dungeon itself. But as a dungeon goes, it really, coming out of the Frog Temple, this was kind of a breeze. I'm amazed it took us so long to get through it. Right? I mean, it's a relatively small dungeon.
Yeah, it's not very big. And also, to be clear, Eliot, just for anyone who's listening, you didn't have a character die in the dungeon. You chose to retire a character while the party was expeditioning in the dungeon. And then
yeah, I know that. I was just saying that's not going to be the common thing. Most likely someone's going to die, and that's why they're going to be reintroducing into a dungeon. But
for sure,
in my case, was special.
And you guys were super careful going through this dungeon. I think I kind of like gassed you guys up a lot, kind of getting prepared for save or die type of stuff and things like that. Like, you're being very careful and good form. Y'all made it and nobody died. There were definitely opportunities for multiple characters to die easily. I guess to talk a little bit about the structure of the dungeon, it's 3 levels. The first level is basically a single room. The second level is where the bulk of the dungeon square footage exists. It's a multi-room layout with several interesting little nooks and crannies. And then there's a third level below that that I think is probably the most interesting level, because it's a spiral staircase with a cistern full of water in the bottom that contains this weird little mausoleum sort of thing. And there's multiple secret passages and things like that. But there's an interesting note about this dungeon is that there is no top-down map of the third level. You only get a cross-section, like a side shot of the dungeon. And that was an interesting choice. And to my knowledge, aside from a real basic sketch in the Wilderness book for OD&D, if I'm not mistaken, yeah. This is the first time that you see a perspective of a dungeon that is not the top-down view. And that's kind of one of the trademarks of Jaquaiz's dungeon design, is an emphasis on like the 3-dimensionality of the space, which I think is really cool considering how early this is.
I mean, just looking at the maps, the maps are quality for the time. I mean, especially I'm going to always be comparing it to the Frog Temple because that's kind of where we came from, and it seems like they're contemporaries, and a very big jump in just quality of the graphic. It looks like a dungeon you'd find today. That's the main thing I'm noticing. Is whereas the other one, it was maybe I'm misremembering, Jordan, but the publishing quality of it wasn't quite as good. And this isn't even like a major publisher, right?
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. I can't speak to what the origin of the art was specifically for this dungeon cartography. I don't know if there was a different version when this was originally published, or if this is what got released when these were coming out as single issues. This could have been something that got revised by Judges Guild later, but still, even if that's the case, you're still talking about the mid-70s here. But that's just speculation on my part. I see nothing in this publication that leads me to believe that this is anything but original work as it appeared as, a tiny, like, zine press kind of release.
I mean, maybe you already said this, and if so, you can cut this out, but I didn't catch, like, how close in time is it to the Frog Temple, like as far as publication date?
Sure. Temple of the Frog comes out in, best as I can track down, it's somewhere in April of 1975. So this is 1 year and 2 months later. And there's definitely stuff in here that makes it very clear that Temple of the Frog was very influential on the design of some of these adventures. Fichilrak's Tomb, not so much, but another interesting thing about this series of 6 issues of the Dungeoneer is that there were multiple modules that were published as kind of one-offs, but they kind of grew on top of each other, and they would start sharing unique monsters that first appeared in earlier editions. And eventually this whole thing gets presented as arguably the first campaign setting, because that whole county map that I've shown you guys of County Crake encapsulates, 5-6 different dungeons that each start getting linked together by a narrative. TSR didn't have anything like that at the time, and to my knowledge, Judges Guild doesn't get anything like that until 2 months later, when City State of the Invincible Overlord comes out in August of 76, which is like kind of the great grandfather of your Waterdeep or City of Greyhawk, or name your metropolis D&D like campaign setting. Like City State of the Invincible Overlord is kind of the first publication of that idea.
So one of the things you said really leads into one of my questions about the tomb itself. You had said that like on the overland map that was existent at some point, where there's several dungeons that are kind of being linked together, not only in location but narrative. Like, what was there very much that you had to change? And before we go any further, I also want to make clear that we're gonna have spoilers for this adventure in this episode. So if you're a potential player, don't listen to this or forget what you're about to hear. But like, what types of things did you have to change in order to make this tomb fit into County Crake in the story that we are being a part of?
So Jaquays and company did the stitching together themselves to make Fichilrak's Tomb fit within County Crake. The Castle Crake that you guys are about to go into is kind of the centerpiece of this whole little setting, and Fichilrak's Tomb is one of the satellite dungeons that's within this valley. So there's stuff that like loosely ties this together anyway, if nothing else but just proximity. As far as the narrative tie-ins, that was pretty easy because I think Jaquays had just got done reading Temple of the Frog and was like, oh, this is sick. I want to do something that is somewhat derivative of it, but also builds upon the theme. And so, it was a natural next step for this campaign. So for one example, I guess, this is not in Fichelrak's tomb, but this is in the County Crake map. One of the locations of interest is that crater that has pieces of a broken spaceship where some kind of alien blob entity that's referred to as the slime god crash landed at one point in the past. Well, that is absolutely working with the themes that I've already set up by pulling in all of the Dave Arneson stuff from Blackmore that I could get my hands on that uses Temple of the Frog and the whole like cultist kind of vibe with the Egg of Coot as being this like Cthulhu-esque background villain that everyone's kind of like afraid may be manipulating anyone that is around, and it's just kind of this villainous ambiance to the whole thing. That's what I'm going for anyway. It's what Arneson went for, and what Jaquays obviously picked up. Preying upon a small community, using them like a farm to harvest bodies for their weird, quasi-scientific experiments. It's all there.
So one thing that I'm latched on that I didn't completely understand was that, so this comes as a setting or a small regional map with multiple places to go, or was this tomb individually published and situated within a pre-existing, or they grafted it onto it after the fact? Or did this all come, like the castle, this tomb, did they all come out as one complete thought all at once?
What I suspect is that the County Crake setup was the culmination of these multiple dungeons that a lot of people had were working on, some of them cooperatively, some of them individually. And what they wanted to do once they had gotten several issues into this thing, and, we're referring back to each other's work, like I said, and, reusing a lot of cool ideas, is that they knitted it together into this valley for people to romp around in as a sandbox. I think that's how it went. It's a little hard to tell because, like I said, I only have the compendium to look at. I don't have the individual issues, but there's a little bit of the kind of pacing of it in this compendium, and that's the way it reads to me.
You guys want to dive into the details of it itself? I'm curious, Jordan, did the way we got hooked into it, I know that in any game today you're going to have a hook ideas section. Is there a similar thing in this, or was it just kind of on you to kind of throw the line out and get us fish hooked on to getting into this tomb?
That's on me. So this valley, there's one road in from the north, and there's a river that heads south, and you don't know what's to the north except that it has one note in passing that's the way to the capital of the land. And it literally says, it's your campaign, you work it out, in parentheses. And there's nothing about what would be to the south where the river goes. And as far as the first town that you guys came to after the whole time jump thing post Temple of the Frog, you guys went to Poortown, which is the kind of base of operations in the Holmes Basic set. So there's an adventure that goes along with that you guys will get back to at some point. Holmes Basic, by the way, comes out in January of 1977. So even that isn't out at this point. The only thing that's out when these adventures are going on are the original, like, white box, like 3 little books. That's what people are playing with in chainmail. So anyway, as written, I made the choice to run this adventure a little bit in the past from when it's presented in the magazine. So Crakesboro, the central town, as published, has already been overrun by the zombies, the aqua zombie things. It's completely just a dead village with these ghouls wandering around, and there's a demon that is kind of ruling over it and fucking with anybody that comes through. I decided to run it a little bit prior to that, before the zombies take over, to see what the town would have been like with people living there, still, under siege on all sides by, all these weird evil things. And I wanted you guys to have a safe base of operations to work out of. That I think is something that is clearly like a later addition. Like you see it in Home's Basic, the home base kind of deal. You sort of get the hint that might be what the village is for in the Temple of the Frog, but people are constantly on edge because you don't know where there's spies and whatever else, and I guess that's interesting. But you don't see that become like a main theme that gets repeated over and over again until like Keep on the Borderlands, like almost 2 years later. But anyway, yeah, all those people of Crakesboro, as written, those characters don't exist. They're all ghouls, and the place is just kind of a valley of hell with no place for any kind of respite.
Thank you for doing that and making the village actually a location where NPCs are, because I have the feeling that if we had rolled into town and the town was overrun and there was nobody to talk to and just monsters all around, we would have said, fuck this, and just moved on to the next area.
Exactly. I wanted to give you guys a fighting chance and a reason to explore. This party is not particularly greedy, so the assumption of riches is not enough for you all to risk your life and limb for. But I wanted to give you guys a plausible reason to go after these things and a chance to do so. And Jaquays even says in one of the kind of editorial columns how, or maybe it was the intro to one of the dungeons, how they had gotten criticism from readers about how all of the dungeons that they had published were for way higher level than what most people are playing at, and people were going into these things and it's just a fucking meat grinder. So they eventually did like a low level dungeon to give people a chance, relatively speaking, I guess. But if not that, like honestly, for the life of me, I don't know what early D&D players were even playing. Presumably just whatever shit the DM threw together for that week.
I mean, if you don't have people to tell you there are tombs and there are caves over yonder, how the fuck are you going to know where to explore?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's so goddamn deadly when you throw in the wandering monsters and all the random shit. I mean, the demon that is supposed to be overseeing the village as this petty dictator, which is the first spot that you would walk into after breezing past the castle that there's no obvious way into. That demon is a Nalfeshni, which is really kind of it's like the lower tier of the top rank of demons. Like, the thing is just gonna fuck up most parties that just wander in there, not expecting this thing to be there.
We've gotten away from using retainers, and maybe that's just kind of on us, but if this predates Home's Basic, then the version of D&D they were using, they probably would have been playing more like those early sessions that we had where there was a player character was rolling with a squad, more than likely, of at least a couple helpers. I could see how this would be not easier, but I could see how this tomb could definitely do a good job shaving off a few followers as you push people in, other characters in your stead, because there's some shit in this tomb.
Yeah, and the valley itself, I think you're right. I could see it if you rolled in with a company of 100 fighters and then the PCs, but just a handful of dudes, that's a tall order here. Yeah, so anyway, that's the overview of things. You guys want to get into the particulars of the dungeon now?
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about what we experienced going in, particularly the literal first obstacle that we encountered in the entire tomb, the first non-lethal obstacle that we encountered that fucking derailed all of our momentum, split the party, and it was just a clusterfuck all the way down. We go into the tomb. There's a small landing as you enter into the tomb, and it wasn't big enough for all of our characters to fit on, and so we line up, and kind of some of us are standing on the stairs that lead down, and suddenly the stairs turn into a slide, and half of the party gets slid down to a lower level with no obvious easy way up, and it's 100 feet, and we look around, and everybody who had rope was down in the dungeon. Everybody on top. Nobody had rope.
I just want to tell you, I was laughing really hard with the mic off when that happened.
Look, rope is really heavy. It's really heavy.
Jordan, even though the mic was off and you are like 1,000 miles away, I could hear you laughing.
I mean, this is why you bring idiots along to carry your packs and your chests and your wheelbarrow or whatever the fuck. I mean, bring some goddamn donkeys. Like, what the hell?
Well, with the spoils that we pulled out of this thing, you better believe we'll buy one.
As soon as we're in a town that has donkeys to buy.
Yeah, fair enough. That's another thing worth mentioning about the terrain of this place is that for this whole valley, it's super vague. Like, it doesn't tell you anything about climate or any of that stuff. So just for context to the listener, I just kind of shoehorned this into Blackmoor, which is a rugged, alternating between mountainous and marshy, kind of northern, think like Alaska sort of place, and with a lot of kind of geologic activity that makes some of these lower valleys that are close to like hot springs and things more habitable. So that's what people are in at this point, is this basically bog that is still cold and uncomfortable. But yeah, those stairs, it didn't say anything about the stairs resetting either, which I thought was interesting. There's 100 feet of stairs at a 45-degree angle, and there's a 33% chance that the stairs will turn into a slide every turn that someone is on them. Well, goddamn if it didn't.
I don't remember. Was it the first turn that we were all three standing on it, or did it hold up for a little bit?
It was the first turn.
I thought. I just didn't remember.
I don't know what the hell y'all would have done if everybody had been down there.
We would eventually have died of starvation because we probably could have made it to the cistern.
I think you probably would have tried climbing up because it is just a 45-degree angle. The problem with that, though, is that since it's 100 feet, if you get an appreciable amount of the way up and then fail, falling damage is unforgiving. It's a D6 for every 10 feet. And at this point, the average level of the party is not even 3 yet. So a bunch of 3-hit dice characters taking up to 10d6 possible damage. Yeah, that's a fucking death sentence.
So that was comedy getting down in there, but I think the next session is when I was absent because I was present for when they fought the statue. So when you go down the steps, it's kind of like an empty room, right?
So there's a landing at the bottom. It's a 15 by 15 room, and you see just a few things down there of any interest. There's a fake door on your left, and a fake door on your right, and a real door in front of you with nothing indicating which is which, of course. And then 2 very large urns on either side of the the corners opposite the stairs. And that's what you guys were faced with. And holy shit, did you all spend a lot of time on those fake doors?
Yep. So that was the second session that we were down in the tombs that we dealt with the fake doors and also the basically the next chamber that was actually a real one. Before we go into that story though, because there's another great gaming story there, I'm looking at the maps and oh my God, Jordan, you were not lying about how confusing the numbering is on these maps. The maps are labeled floor 1, 2, 3, and there are rooms on each level that start at 1 and go up. And then there are the items are labeled alphabetically, but looking at the first room or the first level, you've got number 1 for the level, you have a number 1 for the room, then you have A through L, but you also have A, B, C labeling doors. How in the fuck did you make sense of this?
Dude, I read this probably 5 times. I had to do a bunch of screen capture stuff or like screenshots to get the individual maps out and then just kind of like go through it line by line and try to work it out. Because like I still haven't given you all the actual text of the module because there's stuff that's going to come up later on in our actual campaign and I don't want to spoil that had its origins here. But the way that the descriptions of these things work is damn near stream of consciousness, and the layout just visually of where item A is going to be defined. This is all literally done on a fucking typewriter. Like I can see the irregularities between 2 of the same letter because of the way that the fucking typewriter struck the page differently. This is as primitive as you could possibly get, and these people were just straight up, doing a tab over to try to do the next thing. And there's no bold, no underline. Like this is just plain text, and so it was frankly horrible by today's standards to go through and try to figure it out. But these were college kids who were figuring this shit out. Nobody had ever done this before, really. If your only fucking frame of reference is that pile of shit that was in Supplement 2 Blackmore for Temple of the Frog, goddamn, they're fucking killing it compared to that thing. But yeah, like we've come a long fucking way, boy.
And they did it in a pretty short time. So after you get past those effing doors, there's a story you said you wanted to tell. Is this the right time, Clayton?
Yeah, I want to just say that Session 2 was played inadvertently entirely in real time. At the end of the session, as much time passed in-game as had passed out of game. As I don't remember how many people were there, like 5 or 6 players were there, and literally the first puzzle, quote, puzzle / riddle that we encountered, we banged our head against it in real time for like 2 straight hours trying to figure it out. And it was one of the simplest things that it could possibly have been. And it made, I don't know about everybody else, but it made me feel like an idiot for not noticing how to fucking get past this simple puzzle / riddle.
I laughed so much through this whole adventure, but goddamn, y'all had me fucking rolling on this one. I thought you all were trolling me, honestly. I thought you all had like talked about it when I was away. Like, let's fuck with Jordan and just pretend like we can't fucking get it or whatever. It's like, how the fuck can they not figure this out?
In our defense about us trolling you, there is no fucking way we could have been trolling you, because trolling doesn't evoke the wild leaps of logic that gets us to, well, let's have one of us dress up like Fachelrak in order to open this thing up.
I could have never in a million years dreamed that this was going to turn into a fucking experimental drag show to try to unlock this fucking tomb. This is one of the best examples that I've ever seen of where you literally have no way ever of being able to predict how the fuck your party is going to react to something. Not in a million years would I have guessed that you all would have tried to take that approach of all things.
See, I wasn't here for this, so I'm like on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, there were 5 of us in the session, and we just literally could not figure out the riddle, which I'm trying to find the exact wording of the riddle.
Well, there wasn't an actual riddle to it, except that the placard next to this sarcophagus that you're trying to figure out how to get open, it just says, "Read this and weep."
So on one in one area it says, "Here lies Fachelrak, the gates of death are not locked for him." And then on a placard it reads, "Read this and weep." Well, we took the first part, the other one that wasn't the placard, that says, "Here lies Fachelrak, the gates of death are not locked for him." So that's what we laser focused on in order to try to get past this, not the placard that says, "Read this and weep."
It was so funny. So I first caught wind of this module from a YouTuber that has since removed all of his content, which makes me very sad. It was called Adventure Review. And if by any chance the gentleman who was the creator of Adventure Review ever hears this episode, please bring it back. I loved it. So much of this campaign is directly thanks to Mr. Jackson Shoemaker. He specifically mentioned in his review of Fachelrak's tomb, which you can unfortunately no longer find, he says about that specific thing that they'll either get it in 5 seconds or it'll take like an hour. Something like that is what he says.
How wrong he was. It took us 2.
Oh my God. Yeah, so Clayton, what were some of the alternative approaches rather than reading and weeping that you guys decided to take?
I can't even remember them all, and I don't think I wrote them down. So the dress up was the main one that I remember. So before that, we had to fight some skeletons. We fought some snakes that were in some urns, and we gained some loot. And then I think it was the next session where we came back. Like, we fought everything that was in the room except for some gray oozes that were on a wall, and we decided just to let them be. The next session started with us having the riddle and actually getting beyond this chamber because of how time was running at the end of the previous session. So let's see. My notes just say we try to open up the tomb in different ways. We play dress up. We tried to destroy the sarcophagus. We went back to the false doors and tried to open them. We spent a lot of time doing that. So spread out over 2 sessions, we spent a lot of time trying to open up these false doors, and then the next session coming back and trying to open them again. We tried to use the iconography that was related to the tomb. We tried to just think about the different ways that this tomb fit into the history of Greyhawk and like the whatever information we could learn from or with any lore that we had about Fachelrak. We went back to town at some point. I think it was between sessions. We went back to town and rested, and we talked to the wise lady in town about it, and really didn't get much because this tomb had sat undisturbed for however long it had sat there. So we really beat our heads against the wall trying to get through this very simple puzzle. And the entire time we were focused on the wrong phrase.
And I kind of felt bad with that whole bit about like the lore, because this adventure is not set in Greyhawk. It's not set anywhere in particular except for County Crake. So like all the other stuff is just like me trying to, kind of merge it into the existing campaign in a reasonable way. And I had no way at all of giving you guys any further hints. The thought occurred to me multiple times, like, what if they just turn around and leave? You did it to the last one. You guys walked into the dungeon of the ground goblins and were like, fuck this sounds scary, and fucking beat feet. It's like, oh my god, they very well might not make it past the first room. Also, I want to point out one thing about those two urns at the very bottom of the stairs. This is how fucking brutal D&D was back then. First thing you come across is a staircase that is almost certain to collapse into a slide before you hit the bottom, hitting you with God knows how many d6s of falling damage, just off the bat. Next, you've got two urns. If you look into one, there's a giant cobra. It says player will die in 1 turn if bitten. The other urn contains 10 vipers. Die in 4 turns if bitten and not treated. Fucking shit.
Yeah. Let's get into some of these rooms that are so crazy deadly.
Let's do it.
So I need to go over how we actually defeated the puzzle. And that was one player finally noticed that the other placard just said, read this and weep. So he read it and he forced himself to cry, and the way made itself known to us.
Good on you, Steel. You got bonus XP for that.
He fucking deserved it too. I was the caller, and yeah, the entire time I was like 5 seconds away from just saying, I'm done. Let's fuck off.
I knew you were so pissed off, Clayton. Like, I know how much you hate puzzles, and I was like, oh my god, this is the worst session of this campaign for Clayton right now.
I mean, how did it take? I don't know. I wish I could have been there, because that is the exact same thing as Lord of the Rings. You literally acted out Lord of the Rings. It was speak, friend, and enter. Yeah,
that's all it was. Anyway, eventually, you guys Steel teared up, and the sarcophagus opens. That reveals a 100-foot chute down into the next level of the dungeon, just to show you how important rope can be. So, yeah, you guys get down there. It's a big room. I talk about some shit, stuff you see on the walls or whatever. First intersection, there's a pit, just trapdoor, 10-foot pit, no spikes, just a pit. Steel falls in. The other rooms that get interesting, it's a little further down the hallway. I guess the one you guys open up, and it's another deep chute going straight down that smells like methane. You guys decide to let that one be for a while. You find another chute going straight down. It's got a ladder in the wall. You let that one be for a while. But the next room is where shit got interesting on this level, where, as I described it to you, there were 3 statues of manticores there. I guess I should go back briefly here. On the first level, there's a skull that you all found. You found it, Clayton. And it's kind of oddly worded what exactly the skull is there for. So I just kind of interpreted it. Give me just 1 second to pull up the exact phrasing here. Yeah, okay. So behind the left plaque, there is a skull which casts a hold person spell, which you saved against, and then an ESP spell to give directions to his victim. Okay, so the ESP spell is not it's not like a charm person. It's like an astral projection, remote viewing, like clairvoyance sort of thing. So it's a weird phrasing there, and to the best of my interpretation, the intention of that is basically a lure for Fichelrak to bring people down into the dungeon. And so I decided, all right, what's an ESP spell do? It makes you this kind of like disembodied, kind of observer that just sort of flies through shit. And so I gave you a little bit of a preview of what the dungeon was going to be like very quickly because obviously we were sort of disoriented or whatever. So anyway, we get to this room with the manticores in it.
Before you do that, I just want to say I actually love that, like that somebody got like some information about the dungeon before we actually go down into the dungeon, because that's something I hate as a player, is going into an area completely blind and everybody you talk to says, oh, well, nobody's ever been down there, or everybody who goes down there dies, so we have no information about what lies ahead. I am so sick of that in any and all dungeons. I want to be able to learn something about what I'm encountering before I encounter it. And I am amazed that there was something like that I wish was in more dungeons, in literally one of the first dungeons.
Well, ESP, if I'm not mistaken, is a first level magic user spell. So it's conceivable that I think this is probably highly likely to become standard practice once you find that spell somewhere. That you all might spend a significant amount of time, maybe days, just going back to the entrance of a dungeon and you just doing like clairvoyance type of shit as far as you can get down into the dungeon, and doing a lot of like kind of pre-mapping, just sending in, your fucking drone to work out what might be down there ahead of time. Anyway, so one of the stupid things about this dungeon that I decided to make a little tweak to, and I'm going to be doing this anytime I come across it, is it makes that weird choice of having living monsters just lingering for eternity in a room somewhere for no reason. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense, especially considering that there are spells that you could cast on a monster to make it so that they could stay there as guards for eternity. So that whole thing about them being petrified and then de-petrifying when you guys entered the room, that was completely my edit to have some kind of nod to realism in dungeon ecology.
And I love the fact that you went one step further and actually used the rules for the petrify spell, particularly coming out of petrification, especially when one of the three died from, I don't remember what it was called, but basically system shock coming back from stone. It just didn't survive and died. We were all so elated when that happened.
It's exactly what it is a system shock roll, and that happens for player characters too, and that's for polymorph and petrification and all sorts of different things that do some radical change to the makeup of your body. And so yeah, you guys came across a half depetrifying manticore that vomited up its guts as a bunch of gooey gravel and then just collapsed. And then you had two manticore to deal with. That fight, I gotta say, from a DM's perspective, was annoying.
I can imagine.
Clayton, why don't you describe your strategy?
Well, I was the caller, and I called an actual strategy for dealing with these things. We had areas to fall back to. We could see that these things were not big enough to basically more than one of them attack us at a time. So we fell back to a one of the intersections and started peppering it with arrows. And at my first opportunity, I cast Enlarge upon the foremost one, doubling its size. Since it was already squeezing it, I basically made it stuck in the corridor. We just ranged attacked it until it was dead, and then came time to deal with the second one.
Yeah. It puts you in a weird spot as a dungeon master, because these are intelligent monsters, and they're not super intelligent, but they're slightly more intelligent than animals. They have their own language between them. So, I'd put them at maybe elephant intelligence or dolphin, something like that. But yeah, there was just literally no way for them to really get to you quickly enough to do serious damage. And there's nowhere else for them to go. They can't retreat, really. So I had one just kind of like pacing around like a tiger in a cage, and whenever he got a shot, he'd sling a tail spike at one of you guys. But eventually enough arrows and magic missiles and whatever, all just kind of peppered these things to death, and that was pretty much that. One thing you guys missed is there was an entire room down there, that room 3 on that second level dungeon. Nobody did any searching in that area, so I didn't give anybody any like default, passive perception rolls. There's a weird room down there. It has 10 gremlins in it. And gremlins are a original monster from Dungeoneer, and they're something like a cross between like goblins and like fire mephits. They're these weird little like fiery creatures that'll just kind of appear, do a bunch of fire damage. Some of them will like throw little fire bolts or whatever at you, and that sort of thing. But then within the room, there was a whole bunch of these weird little stones, 40 stone tiles. No, I'm sorry, read that wrong. 225 stone tiles. Floor is covered with these things. And on the back of 3 of them is writing. And 2 of those are the equivalents of scrolls of spells. And they're like weird stuff, like gaze, reflection, confusion, whatever. Couple different things like that. The other one is a map written in Gnomish that leads to Fichelrak's resting place. Super fucking weird. I'm kind of glad you guys didn't find that room, because like in actual play terms, what does that look like? You got 225 tiles in a room. I guess you just like speed through that. Say, okay, we check all of them. All right, cool. How many fucking turns does that take? How many tiles can you check in a turn? I'm supposed to be keeping track of torches and, goddamn fucking rations. I don't know. So that room kind of annoyed me. But anyway, probably the most interesting thing about this dungeon, in my estimation, is the statue room. What do you guys have to say about that?
By far.
By far what?
The most interesting room in the dungeon. I feel like that might be the most dangerous room I've been in, and everyone got out scot-free. Well, mostly.
In this room, there was something that happened within our group that I felt like really highlighted the difference between old school D&D and modern gamer mindset of D&D. We've been going through this dungeon and the previous dungeon with a caller, and each round we go through and we figure out what each one of us is doing, and then the caller tells the DM what they're doing. This room had like 16, 17 statues, something like that. I don't remember. Okay, 11. It was definitely more than we had characters. And we eventually get to the point where we're like, okay, we need to see what these statues actually are. And where this breakdown happens, or what I view as a breakdown, was that some of the party just got sidetracked. And I think part of that is this mentality of where something has to happen every single turn to each individual player. There is this expectation that this is going to happen, that something interesting is going to happen, and if nothing interesting happens, then that is a failure. That is something that indicates that either that you're just not doing something right, because there should be something interesting happening every single turn. And when we ran out of enough statues for everybody to be looking at one in a round, the members of the party who didn't have a statue to look at, didn't have something active to do, the players themselves became incredibly active in trying to find something to do. And that included basically kind of everybody stayed in the same room, but we lost any cohesion in maintaining the the focus of exploring the tomb. I felt like we disintegrated into a bunch of individuals instead of working together at that point. And this is something that had come up a couple of times that I didn't really want to say anything, but I felt like in this room in particular, it became a problem. And it also I felt like became a problem with the cistern, which is coming up later or coming up next. But I just kind of wanted to vent a little bit about kind of my frustration because I was the caller, but also I feel like even if I hadn't been the caller, if I had just been there, I would have gotten frustrated because we suddenly had players who were not following the plan, that weren't cooperating as we had been at work. Up until that point, we had been working as a pretty well-oiled machine. Like the fight with the Manticores definitely highlighted that we were working very well together. And I felt like in this room, that kind of fell apart.
Well, everybody was so taken by these different statues. Everybody we knew we shouldn't touch them, which made everybody want to touch them. And I think that those conflicting group versus individual wants kind of broke the whole scene.
Yeah, we had a cleric in the party, and he cast Detect Evil, I believe, and basically said, that one's evil, that one's evil, that one's evil, and that one's evil. This one's a maybe, and we kind of tried to skirt around those in the first round of what we were doing. But then it came time to, well, are we going to try to figure out if there is something going on here with these statues more than what we've already discovered? Because as we were uncovering the statues that weren't evil, we were suddenly getting hit with magical effects, some of which were very nice boons.
That's one of the rulings that I made in this dungeon that I think that ruling is probably the one that I have second guessed the most as I've looked back on how this dungeon went, of whether or not that was a good idea to just go ahead and kind of red light each of the really dangerous statues. And some of them that I said were quote unquote evil, kind of debatable. I had to make some calls because some of these things kind of behave, fairly randomly, or behave in kind of ambiguous ways. So it was hard for me to interpret like a moral character to some of these effects. So I was just kind of trying to put myself in the mindset of like the player character, how they would feel if they got the effect of whatever is most likely to happen from a given statue. But I really leaned on the idea that this was put here by this like evil wizard a long time ago, and some of these things are clearly just fuck you up. Like one of these things is the statue of a Medusa, and it's 30% chance that the revealer becomes stone. Full stop. That's all it does.
Yeah, and there was one of them. Yeah, and there was another one there that there was another one there that you had Jack's character just point out and say, that is fucking evil. Like there is no debate about it. The other ones, yeah, they're somewhere on the spectrum, but that one on the end, that is straight up evil. And I think that one was like, I really appreciated that call of yours.
Yeah, that one was number 11, and that was the one that I really didn't have any questions about at all, because there's two things going on with that one. That's the one with the shield. It's a shield-shaped mirror, and it's a mirror of life trapping. And there's two entities associated with this. One of them that you all encountered was a specter that is there to guard the whole area, and specters are about as evil a creature as you're likely to come across. The other thing is that the individual inside the shield, trapped in there, is a 9th level chaotic evil fighter named Morak, who I just assume was a lieutenant of Fichelrax. And if he gets let out, suddenly you guys have to deal with this fucking psycho who is decked out in evil shit. Like, he's got equipment that would, on top of his levels, that would just completely, very likely would have led to a TPK. We're like, okay, that's evil. There's another one that's it's just straight up death. You make a saving throw versus magic, and you very well might just get turned to dust with no resurrection possible. Is just added in as if you're high enough level for resurrection to even be an option at this point.
I enjoyed the room. I mean, were all of them random rolls, or were some of them just yes, no, they do it or they don't?
So there's a couple of them that are like that. So there's one that you all came across that is an orc, and it's got a list of languages that are all sort of like goblinoid, green races, kind of humanoid languages. And if you have them, you lose them. If you don't have them, you gain them. So I think Clayton found that first, and he gained a whole bunch of languages, Orcish and Goblinoid, Hobgoblinoid, and whatever. Justin checked it, and he had already had Kobold and I think Goblinoid, and lost those, but then gained the other ones because it's this weird binary switch kind of mechanic. One of them that Jack found, it's an Intling, is what it's called, that has just a ring on its finger that's a magic ring. So he just got that, no problem. Most of them, though, have some kind of weird table that you roll on. The biggest one like that was the Stone Face, and that's the one where Steele had a major life event.
Wait, which because Steele's character Dungar had two major life events happen in that room. First, he became a foot taller as a dwarf, so he's a human-sized dwarf, but as stocky as a human. And then the next one he revealed split Dungar into two people, one black, one white in color, and those characters are now known as Dun and Gar.
Yeah, that was the same statue. He looked once and then looked again. He gained a foot in height, and he's like, man, that was pretty cool, I'll go again. And then he turned into two different people. Let me read to you just a few of the possibilities here. This is a crazy like subtable. There's 10 possibilities. I'm not going to read them all. I'm just going to go through some highlights. And then number 4 has a subtable of 6 other possibilities. I'll probably breeze through that. So if I could, let me breeze through this real quick. Some of the options are: you become invisible permanently. You have to cast Dispel Magic to reverse that, and if you do, you can never become invisible again by any means.
That one would have been awesome.
Wow.
Yeah. Another one is polymorph into a monster for 10 turns. Doesn't say what monster or how to roll it. You're just a monster. Another one is you just receive 2,000 experience points. Just out of nowhere. Number 4 is the one that Steele got. You become 2 people. All things except magic are duplicated. And there's 6 different ways that this can happen. One of them can be male and the other one female. One can be evil and the other good. One can be pure white, the other black. That's the one Steele got. One can be both or half powered, which I read to be you split the total XP the character has between the 2 versions. That would have been totally brutal. The other one is one of them is a monster. Again, no guidance on what kind of monster. And number 6 is no change, so just identical duplicates of the 2. That's crazy. Another thing that statue could have done, just give you +1 con permanently. Could have given or taken, much like the languages, infravision. A foot taller is another option. It can make you insane for 1 hour. You could get 100 platinum pieces in 2 bags. Chris got that one. And the 10th one, which is one of the nuttiest things that I've seen in these modules so far, all weapons turn to rubber.
I love that. Is there rubber in the setting?
No.
Lol.
It's just fucking gonzo.
As fun as that room was, This probably the most intense part was the what happened afterwards.
Yeah, we backtracked a bit back to the room with the manticores, and we started looking for secret passages, and we eventually made our way back to the room with the manticores, and we found the secret passage to the cistern that leads down. Jordan, you said that the map for this one is just a from the side map, and no real map of the rest of the dungeon exists except for that side view. Is that right?
That's right.
I bet that was fun to describe to us how we are going.
I still can't really understand how it's supposed to work out. And one thing that happens in some of these early dungeons is that what they often don't tell you, except maybe, in one passing line, is that a lot of times what you're getting is not a complete dungeon. It's a chunk of a dungeon. And so they'll have ladders or stairs or hallways that are supposed to go off into some part of the dungeon that you're supposed to build, but it may or may not tell you that. That happened a couple of times in that Temple of Tostinka down in the depths. Rather than go into a bunch of shit that I made up, I'm here to explore this published content with you guys. So I said that those offshoot hallways and stairs and whatever just collapsed and didn't bother with it. When I'm looking at this map here of the second level of Fichelrak's tomb, I see stairs down behind one of the statues in that statue room where the mirror shield was. There's a spiral staircase going down, and then there's also that staircase that was just a straight chute with a ladder in it that you guys just kind of found as randomly part of a hallway, right? Little hidden door thing. But then when I look at the side shot of this level with the spiral stairs and the cistern, I see the spiral staircase. I see the ladder going down, which I think I probably fucked up and should have made that be the one in the hallway. But I don't see anywhere where the stairs going down from the statue room connected. And so on the fly, I just made a call and said, okay, once you guys had gotten to the bottom and some people had gotten into the, kind of the very lowest level and then found this weird extra way up, it would be more interesting that you came out in that hidden door by the statues there than if you just came out into a hallway. So I erred on the side of interesting. But for the fucking life of me, I have no idea. You've got 3 ways down, and then on the lower level, it only shows 2 ways up. So where the fuck's the rest of it supposed to go? I don't know.
Going down those stairs were fun.
Yeah, that was a fun puzzle or fun trap. The characters made a save. If they failed their save, then they gain water breathing, which means they can't breathe air, and so people start jumping into the water once they can't breathe.
Which is not how the water breathing spell works, I might add.
Yeah.
Yeah. The wording again on this is super vague, and it left a lot to interpretation, and I tried to make it as interesting as possible. That whole impulse for people to run down and dive into the water, it doesn't say anything like that. As far as I can tell, if somebody doesn't just try that on their own, module as written, they very well might just suffocate wondering what the fuck's going on in the spiral staircase somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. I think you made the right call there.
The bottom of this whole dungeon thing is weird because it kind of tries to trick you, and it pulls a scam that I think Gary Gygax might have straight lifted 2 years later when Tomb of Horrors comes out. And this is a fairly famous feature of Tomb of Horrors and multiple other dungeons. So spoilers, not spoilers, if you're worried about the module that's fucking older than I am. It's a recurring thing that you'll have like a phony treasure hoard and then a real one underneath it if you look a little harder. This module does that. This is... I don't think that happens in Temple of the Frog. It definitely doesn't happen in any of the earlier modules in this. So this might be another groundbreaking piece for Jaquay's credit here. But yeah, you're only really supposed to initially see this little black box on top of the mausoleum that's E on the map that Eliot's character emptied out. It's got 4,000 silver, it's got a gem, it's got, random shit that may or may not be magic. There's like a potion in there. And it says that you can only really get a chance to see this other hidden entrance thing to this mausoleum if you're at it from a particular angle. Well, there's another threat down here in this swimming pool. There just happens to be a capoisynth, a weird deep cut monster that is a water gargoyle that activates down here. And Steele, once again, he's a caster, so he ducked away and was hiding on the other side of the mausoleum from this thing, which makes him line up pretty much exactly where according to the orientation given in this module, that would put him right next to the hidden door that goes into the mausoleum where the actual treasure is.
Are we just going to skip over how what the player character did in order to activate this underwater gargoyle?
It's a good point.
Planted a kiss right on its lips. Can't tell you why. I mean, every time I see an underwater statue, that's the first thing I want to do is I just want to kiss that thing.
It was a gargoyle. It's not even attractive.
So to go back to the statue room, the same character had opened up one of the statues that uncovered it. There's a beautiful woman inside, and that can go several different ways. I think the most likely way is the one that happened to him, where he just falls in love with the statue. Fine. A couple other ways that can go. The statue might come to life. There's like a 10% chance of that. If that happens, the statue basically just falls in love with the person and just follows them around forever. So he's in love with the statue, and the party has to physically drag him away from that room in order to proceed with the dungeon. And for reasons that only he could really elucidate, I think, the next statue we saw, he planted a wet one on it, and it's gargoyle.
And how we managed to kill that thing, I don't know. I think you might have given us a lot of rope on that one, bub. I can't see how we actually defeated that thing.
What really did the trick is, you guys were doing pretty decent damage to it. Everybody's got, +1 weapons or better at this point. Chris showed up finally and did a shitload of damage in one attack. Justin almost died. Justin's playing a dwarf fighter, and he is a fucking bag of hit points. And because he was the first one that activated it, this thing pretty much focused on him, and he got a couple of attacks on it, so it kind of kept his attention. But it was just claw, bite, like every turn. And the rest of the group, couldn't do too much. There was, nickel and diamond going on. I think had Chris not showed up with that +2 sword that he got in the first level, and got a really solid hit on him, Justin might not have made it, because your cleric was not getting in the water. He was too heavily armored, and he was just like, I'll support as I can from up here, but it got super close. I think Justin got down to 2 hit points.
Not only did the cleric not get in the water, but the magic user stayed true to his word on this podcast, and he did not jump in the water.
Yep, that's a fact.
Although I almost did once the fight with the underwater gargoyle commenced. I was really torn, whether or not I should hold to what I said or not, because I could tell the situation was getting dire.
Well, in my situation, my character dove in, and being a first level nothing, I haven't had a chance. It was clearly obvious that they needed a magic weapon to even do damage. I had no such thing. So, I just started clearing gold. I don't know what I would have done if they would have been overtaken by that gargoyle, but, I had absolutely nothing for that thing.
Yeah, composant's nothing to fuck with. as a group of third level characters, like that's a pretty decent challenge. But yeah, that was the last major combat encounter of the dungeon. The rest of it was dealing with the fucked up shit you found in the little mausoleum thing.
This was another area where it felt like we were encountering a puzzle that just nobody could crack.
Agreed. And by the time we got there, me as a player and my character were in alignment. Didn't really want to fuck with them that much. Like, okay, can't figure it out. Can we just clear this place and go? We have at this point we have thousands of coin. It's been a great haul. My character's like, screw it. But you guys had already made like a deal with the townsfolk. You kind of had a bigger reason to be there. I was just there for the money, and I just couldn't understand, like, why are we still screwing with this thing?
Yeah, and it didn't help that I was feeling sick that night, and I actually had to bow out of the session early, so I missed the majority of you guys just busting your heads against this problem and not coming up with the way through it.
The weird thing to me is that there's not really a puzzle here. It's just a situation that is not what you might have expected exactly. And I'm trying to like tread carefully here because now we're getting into some stuff that may have additional effects, that certainly will have additional effects later on in the game. So I'm going to try to be a little bit careful. This whole thing is a trap for sure. That much is obvious. It's again talking about the Tomb of Horrors. It has a lot of those kind of beats, that this place is set up by this evil wizard for a purpose to draw people in and kind of filter out, the less capable types, just tomb robbers, and really select for some like top tier talent to get this far. So what was down there? There was a platform upon which was a bunch of ashes, presumably the remains of the body of Fachilrak. There was a urn that was platinum, and there was a chest, and the chest had a poison needle on it. Within the chest is a fairly large magical tome of spells. That's pretty much all that was down here. There was some knickknacks in the box that was sitting on top of this mausoleum, but the mausoleum itself didn't have much in the main room. Somebody then found a kind of hidden compartment that there was a dagger, there's a potion, there's a ring, there's a staff, a gnarly looking staff that you all later found out was a staff of withering. So yeah, you found a little bit of extra treasure, and that's what led to the ladder shafts that led back up to the top. That, by the way, is part of what people refer to as Jaquazian design in dungeons, where you don't have just a linear march to the end. You have multiple, if possible, sort of loops, multiple ways that you can get to places, and multiple ways that you can get back out of places. And if at all possible, you open up the dungeon in sort of continually extending circuits. You see this design a lot in like modern games now, that you'll run around a big loop, unlock something, suddenly you're back to where you started, but then this extra thing is now open, and you can run around that big loop, and then so on. It's non-linear dungeon design, but rather kind of folding back on itself, which is awesome for a bunch of other reasons. But anyway,
the dude who made this has a term named after him. He has like a special like cognomen.
Well, it's Janelle Jaquays these days, and Janelle Jaquays has worked on a bunch of different D&D modules for Judges Guild that are thought of as, kind of like, what would I say, milestone modules. I might try to work a few of them into this campaign if I can. Dark Tower and Caverns of Thracia are two of them that stand out. But also, Janelle Jacquez later got into video game design and actually did a bunch of the levels, some of the levels for one or more of the Quake games, actually, and a few other things. Yeah, look up Janelle Jacquez. Fascinating human being. Some good interviews out there too. But yeah, some of the best, like, most well thought out level design ever. And this was, freshman effort right here, literally.
Wow, that's cool. I mean, we really didn't. I mean, that was pretty much it. I mean, the main thing that happened that was notable, I think, at that point is we really did just kind of give up figuring that out. We decided to go back to town. And one of the key components of this challenge or puzzle or whatever you want to call it was that the book was gone. So one of the key components that we felt we needed to do something with just disappeared while we were gone because we left it like dummies. And, I mean, that was pretty much... Oh, yeah, we have one other thing really major that we did, didn't we? The explosion.
Yep. You eventually got back to that shaft that smelled like natural gas earlier.
I think we did the only thing that was logical. I don't know, maybe not. That was one of those rooms that are just kind of those feel bad rooms in dungeons. There's just, there's a bunch of cool shit down there. It's you have a plume of gas coming out that is flammable. We sense movement down there after our wizard thoughtfully throws down essentially a torch, essentially a torch. And so we know there's something bad down there. We know we're going to get jumped. We could potentially explode while we're down there. So what's logical to most people, right?
Well, to me, the most logical thing was to, instead of setting off an explosion while we're in there, we set off an explosion while we're not in there.
Exactly.
There's a few possibilities on how that might have worked out. You guys being the level that you are and having the resources that you are, it completely makes sense that things went the way that they did. If you had a few more things like ESP as a spell, for example, or some of the other sort of divination kind of things, you might have been able to remotely figure out more about what was going on down there. Just to explain, says the wall at the bottom of this 100-foot shaft is covered with a gray ooze. So that's what was waiting down there for you, and that's what enveloped the ever-burning torch thing that you tossed down there, the magical torch that didn't actually light anything on fire. Had you actually gone down there and killed that ooze, what you would have found, had you been down there when the thing had exploded, it says you would have taken 20 hit dice of damage. Now, when they say hit dice, they mean D8s. So 20 D8 of damage being in that inferno had it exploded when you were in there. But if you had somehow made it or somehow gotten things out of there safely, you would have walked away with 25,000 gold pieces and 1,000 pieces of platinum.
Damn.
So, by the way I reckon it, what's that? 35,000 gold?
Well, I mean, we didn't get that much, but this tomb was pretty loaded down with valuables. We got several thousand worth of gold and other valuables in there.
Yeah, you got $6,000 in gold from the Manticore room. You got $4,000 in gold from silver rather, from the cistern. You got an assortment of magic items, some of which you have no idea what they do, but there's multiple good ones. There is one that we didn't mention that Chris came across, a ring of paranoia that made him delusional and think that the rest of the party was out to get him. That's a tough one to adjudicate and ask a player character to play, and Chris did a great job with that.
Yes, he did.
Another thing you guys got right off the bat in the first room, Chris just got a fucking +2 sword off of one of the skeletons.
Woo!
Yeah, just picked it up. Like, y'all could have left at that point, had your first +2 sword, and deuced out. Let me tell you something, though. This fucking spell book is stacked.
Well, then I hope I find it again.
I will say that I have not pulled any kind of chicanery as a dungeon master, snatching it away from you. I've run this, aside from the ways that I mentioned that I modified it, hopefully for the better. I've tried to run this as by the book as possible. So yeah, if y'all find it and all else being equal, you get it.
I don't want to say too much, but I have one or two ideas about where it might have gone.
So all kinds of places it could have gone. And just to wrap up the experience in Fichelrek's tomb, as far as how you guys actually played it out, it doesn't say this in the book or in the module, but I figure it's a pretty classic way to wrap shit like this up. That once you kind of unearthed all of the shit that's going on, completely penetrated down into the place and took all the stuff that seemed relevant, and on top of all of that, also set off a 20d8 explosion in the very core of the building. I decided that once you all were clear of it, it eventually would have just collapsed into itself and become completely buried. So we're still a few things in there that y'all didn't take out. Nobody ever got squirrely and grabbed that mirror shield to see what would happen, or a few other things that people were leery of. But I decided, all right, we're closing this one for the ages.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way in hell that Colm would be heading back into that tomb without very good direct justification.
So, all told, I don't know. What do you guys think? 1 to 10 or 1 to 20, if you like. How would you rate this dungeon?
Well, knowing now how early of a dungeon it is, it kind of skews my opinion higher. Just that there is so much going on here that is probably being done for the first time. Makes me want to rate it higher than ordinarily, because ordinarily I would rate most just straight up dungeon crawls pretty low.
Yeah, I kind of have similar feelings. I mean, like a 6 or a 7, maybe, but it's so difficult. I don't want to judge the product for that, what you just said, but in terms of getting through it, it seemed like it took forever. We were right in just going snail slow because it's so deadly, and we were right in doing so. There are definitely a lot of feel bads, just like gotcha bitch kind of things but that's kind of what a dungeon's supposed to do. This was really before the time that anybody really tried to suit a dungeon for a certain level, and I kind of like, I like getting away from that mentality that something's supposed to be leveled for a party. I think that's it's very defeating. I don't know. It's almost like a waste of time in a lot of ways. It can kind of kill. I'd rather it be like this, but at the same time,
despite the fact that it took us so long to get through, it is relatively short. That gives it high marks in my book. I think it's overall a really solid dungeon. I mean, if you wanted to convert it, there's a lot of stuff you could do to basically make it, one, readable, playable, but just a little bit of elbow grease, and you can turn this into a modern dungeon that would stand alongside any that's being published today. I would say I'd probably rate it maybe a 7 or an 8.
I mean, it does have good variety. A lot of dungeons don't have the variety that it does. I mean, it has water. It has you're going to end up having to deal with some swim stuff. It's got interesting traps. Like you said, it's not that long. Yeah, I mean, I'd lean more towards the 7 than the 6.
Yeah, my main complaint about it is really just the layout, and being that they did this on typewriters, I don't know that I could do much better. These were kids figuring it out as they went, and I understand that there is a reprint of this that came out only in print format from a Texas convention a couple years ago, but I don't have a copy of it, and I wish they put it out in PDF. But yeah, overall, I think you could really easily give this a little bit of spit and polish and make a decent, quick dungeon. But yeah, it's for sure much more brutal than what people are used to these days.
You think you're ready to go into geek things, or is there any last minute things you want to say about the Tomb of Fichelrak's tomb?
Well, I'm curious from just a player perspective if there was anything that you guys would prefer I had either ruled differently or would have liked to have seen differently. Was there anything about it that just seemed kind of fucked up and too weird, or was it sort of what you expected? I don't know. Do you guys feel like you got a fair shake out of it? You know what I mean?
I really appreciated all the things that you said on this episode about the things that you changed, the things that you modified. Really gives a lot of perspective on how to run it as a modern day gamer. I think that in every instance you explained, I think you made the right call. I think you changed it in the right way, and you made things flow pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I have no complaints. I mean, we're getting the experience we signed up for. It's in line with the game style. I mean, I feel like it very much, it feels like what we're the whole point of the game is, we're running through old modules. It feels like an old module, and yeah, it's been fun.
My only real complaints are just kind of the old school style. The more we play it, the more I'm really glad that we don't really play games like this anymore, like in this style anymore. But I mean, other than that, you're doing a really good job of running the campaign.
Could you tell me just a little bit more about that? I know we're running super long, but with taking this, Fichelrak's tomb as an example, what is it about the old school style that you don't like? Because I'm looking at what I've got on, lined up for this campaign that I'm running, that I intend to be a very long running campaign. There's a lot of old school shit in here. I mean, it's pretty much all old school. And I want you to have fun. So, what is it that kind of chaps your ass about it?
That there is an entire area you go into and there's no social interaction. The only social interaction that happens is between the player characters. There's not really any NPCs that are there. And you kind of address this in just making Village Crake having NPCs. So I feel like you are sensitive to that as well, and you are helping to mitigate that as much as you really can, and still follow the spirit of what these adventures originally intended.
Yeah, this being a tomb makes it a significantly different experience than if you had gone deeper into the Dungeon of the Ground Goblins, for instance, or if you guys get to Palace of the Vampire Queen, where it's a living environment. It's more of a castle or fortress or whatever. With this, nothing's moving around down here unless something triggers it. This is not a living space. It's literally a tomb. So, yeah.
I do kind of wonder how our group is going to react whenever we get into those situations where we are in a quote dungeon and we encounter something we can talk to, because we've already kind of had that happen once, and the thing that happens is everybody just chomps at the bit in order to get into combat.
I have no complaints. It's right on theme. I would agree with Clayton in his assessment that I feel like old games were just getting out of the table. I think they were just delighted to have, instead of a giant tabletop full of a bunch of expensive minis they had to take years to paint and screw with just to play one scenario, they were just tickled to have a low-key, didn't take a lot of maintenance, just let's run a bunch of individuals through this very lethal experience. And I think that, that's kind of the stage of development. You can clearly, this had to be done first in the development, and I think having character development and story through lines and things like that is, that's a later development, right, that we're watching evolve.
For sure. And just to give you guys a little bit of a preview of the next part of this, which is directly connected to this module. And Castle Crake, which is probably 3 times the size of this dungeon at least, the centerpiece of this whole Counting Crake campaign setting from Dungeoneering, I went through and listed out all of the NPCs that are named or, have some kind of significant role in it. There's something like 20 different NPCs that you could feasibly have a conversation with within that castle. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, now I'm looking forward to Castle Crake. I was actually kind of dreading it, thinking, okay, it's going to be even bigger, and I really do. I was fearing that it was just going to be another Temple of the Frog thing where we get in there and nearly everybody's trying to kill us. The only time we can talk to someone is whenever we trick them into making us, or into stealing their clothes and taking on the persona of one of the people who belong there.
Well, don't get me wrong. It's the fortress of the bad guy. So I hope everybody goes in with some kind of, stealth and caution and subterfuge in mind. It reads to me as something like Jaquaiz's take on a scenario like Temple of the Frog, but it's more complicated, I would say, in narratively, as far as multiple interests, multiple groups of people and sorts of entities that you might have conversations with. So I'm excited to see how it goes.
That's kind of what I was intending, is that I was hoping that there would be different groups at play in there rather than just one monolithic group being the Temple of the Frog and the people who are blindly following the leader. All right, are we ready to move on to geek things on this long episode? All right, I only have one thing. It's a YouTube channel that I've been watching recently. It is called Alien Theory. And this channel has been around for about 5 years now, and it goes pretty deep into the Alien franchise with the xenomorphs and branches off into the Predator parts of that franchise as well, and just explaining things, explaining connections, and it actually goes quite deep into the Dark Horse comics. I've been kind of going through some of these videos and am really enjoying it. If you really like the Alien franchise and the Predator franchise, definitely check it out.
I love that channel so much. As somebody that grew up devouring the Dark Horse comics, Aliens and Predator stories, fucking Music of the Spears and all those fucking Predator one shots and the original Aliens versus Predator story arcs, so fucking good. Jesus Christ. You want to talk about a couple of franchises that really fucking lost their luster over the years? Oh my god.
Yeah.
Well, I can go next. I have been just searching around for new systems to get back into or to get into, and I've been really into wanting to run a game called Mithras. I want to run. They make a Rome setting I've been into called Mythic Rome, but both books are made by a company called Design Mechanism. They've adapted. I've been trying to figure out if there's some sort of open and gaming license they've used for the percentile system used by Chaosium and RuneQuest, but they've modified that system to make it their own. It's basically the same as RuneQuest with some minor tweaks, but they've just kind of kept the old percentile system alive. They're a very small company, but they make a lot of cool products, and it's just cool to see very lean publishers out there still making content for old games. That system, the percentile-based system from Chaosium, goes back almost as far as Dungeons & Dragons itself. And it's an awesome system. I look forward to it. I just have had a lot of fun getting back into it. And I'm glad there's somebody still carrying the torch. And Design Mechanism is who's doing it right now. So good for them. Been using them a lot.
I'm really looking forward to playing that. So my geek thing is See the Northman. Holy shit. I just fucking watched it last night. It's simple. It's straightforward. I appreciate an uncomplicated narrative now and then, especially in something like a Viking story. It's essentially, if you distill Hamlet and Conan the Barbarian and mix the two together, you get the Northman. What the fuck else do you want? Like, it's great. The cinematography is beautiful. You're not looking for a lot from, acting, dialogue, and writing and blah, blah, blah. It's not about that. It's a fucking entertaining movie. And I also appreciate that they bothered to hire a historian whose name escapes me at the moment, who's one of the foremost experts on Scandinavian culture in the period, to do all kinds of advising on like particulars of clothing and the construction of the villages and weapons and all that sort of thing. And it walks this really interesting line through the story between historical realism and kind of veering into this sort of trippy, like kind of psychedelic mythological kind of experience. It's just really fucking good. So check it out. If you don't like it, fuck you.
All right, guys. What do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
About time.
Sweet.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.